Okay, so I've got two questions for you. First of all, are you happy? Second of all, are you an adult? Yeah. Today, we are going to learn more about happiness and find out when you are the happiest and also when you're an adult. All right, so the other day I bought one of those, the Google Home for my office. It's got the screen on there and it shows all my Google photos. And the great thing is I spent the time a while ago and loaded in all my photos, like of old albums. I scanned them in. And so I'm constantly now here in my office seeing the old days, just these pictures of things that, were fun at one point and all these memories just keep rushing back to me throughout the day. And if I could go back to that time, would I? Well, okay. So was I truly happy back then? Or was I just hamming it up for the photos? When are we truly happy? What age are we our most happiest? And that is what we're going to learn more about today. Happiness and really adulting. When are we an adult? Is it a mortgage? What is it that makes us an adult? So we are going to talk about that today. I'm joined by Clare Mehta. She is Associate Professor of Psychology at Emmanuel College. Hey, Clare, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
I was actually expecting you to say happy when I asked you that question.
Well, you don't know how old I am.
Well, it's okay. You've got me there, which goes right into our topic. At what age are people their happiest?
So there was a study that was done recently it was actually done. I always like to let people know that this is the case. It was done by a pharmaceutical company that was like trying to push some vitamins that will like make you feel energetic, right? Which is what people who are, and I will admit to being in my 40s, people in their 40s are interested in this type of thing. So they did a survey actually asking this very question: at what age do people feel happiest? At what age would people most want to go back to if they could? And people said the age of 36. So this was really kind of interesting to see this and to think about this. And my research has been focusing on people in this age period, so aged between 30 to 45. And so when I saw this study, I was actually pretty excited because it matched with what I've been finding by interviewing people in this age period. So I've interviewed over 100 people so far, and we've asked them what are some of the rewards in their lives, what are some of the challenges, and it's been really eye-opening for me to see that most people, it's really easy for them to talk about some of the rewards. They overall feel pretty satisfied with their life.
36. I'm thinking about where I was at 36. Okay, so I had been married for 5 or 6 years. I had a mortgage. We had a baby. It was kind of, I would say, a little stressful at that point. But I guess stress and happiness really don't. I mean, are those looked at in the same vein? I mean, can you be happy and still be stressed? Or talk a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you 100% can be stressed and happy. So I'm glad that you brought this up and talked about all of these things that are going on with you, because this is what I had found in my research that I thought was so interesting. So I'm going to back up and kind of tell you the story of how I started studying this, and then I'll link these things together. Yeah. So I think I was probably about 36 or 37 when I first started thinking about this idea. And I'm a developmental psychologist. That's how I was trained. And I was trained as a lifespan developmental psychologist. So that means that I think about development across the lifespan. And in my education, I had learned all about infant development, child development, adolescence, emerging adulthood, which is a relatively new period. That's 18 to age 29. And then it kind of stops for a while and people talk about midlife. And midlife, I would argue, starts at about 45, and then older adulthood, which starts at 65. So I noticed there was this big gap that nobody was talking about. And it was the age period I was in. And looking around at my friends, what was going on in their lives, what was going on in my life, people were getting divorced. They were suddenly deciding that they were going to quit their job
Right.
and do something completely different. They were having children. They were, there were some really sad things. I had friends who were losing children. People are losing parents. And for people who are in jobs and careers that they enjoy, they're really doing that push to kind of get ahead and to get some seniority in the positions they're in. And so it seemed like it was such a busy time of life. And to your point, a really stressful time of life where people were juggling all of these things. And I just didn't understand why nobody was looking at this period. And I actually had this moment in particular where I looked at my bookcase and realized that I had more books than I could ever read in the rest of my life. And so for me, that felt like a real turning point. Or it's like, wow, I am not all those things that I thought that I might do when I was like 18 or 20. If I want to do any of those things, now is the time, because time is kind of limited. And so all of these things together are really a recipe for a huge amount of stress to feel, your own mortality and then raising children. Maybe you're looking after aging parents and trying to keep your romantic relationship afloat and trying to get ahead in your career. All of these things are incredibly stressful. So when I started interviewing people, I was really expecting people to tell me how stressed they were, how awful this age period was. But instead, what I was hearing was that people were feeling really happy. And some of these things that caused stress were actually also really rewarding for them. So I'm sure you feel, and hopefully your children aren't listening to this if you're going to give me a bad response, but I'm assuming that you will say that it's rewarding for you to be a parent, right? So it might be stressful, but it's also rewarding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think, probably one of the most stressful things to do in your life is to have a child, but it's also, yes, one of the most rewarding things that you can do in your life, if not the most rewarding thing that you can do in your life, I guess, depending on who you ask. You're right. The mortgage, I don't know, maybe not so much, but
yeah.
Okay. So we're saying that maybe, perhaps in your mid 30s, you're happiest, perhaps for many people. And again, we're talking in general here. It could be different for each individual, obviously. But let's talk about, is there kind of a curve there? Is like that the high point, and does happiness decline with age?
So I'm really glad that you asked this, because I think in psychology, we talk a lot about this U-shaped curve of wellness. So that you are kind of happy before you have children, essentially, and that there's this like big dip. So we're talking about it being rewarding, but there's a lot of research that suggests that you're kind of happy and you're going along and like, yay, everything's great. And then you have kids and there's this big dip in your well-being. And then it's a U-shaped curve. So you go down and then you come back out of it. And if you look at when you come back out of it, it's actually when children leave the house. And
so, kids, if you're listening, tune out today.
I know.
Jeez, don't listen to the rest of this show. Parents, grab a drink and keep listening.
Exactly. And I think I love telling this to my students, by the way, who think that they are the best thing in their parents' lives. Your parents had a life before you, and they will have a life after you too. So, you bring a lot of stress as well as joy. But yeah, so there was this big dip, and people really talked about it as being the cause of it, as being having children. But then if you actually look a little closer at the data, even people who don't have children seem to have this dip in well-being. So this is kind of classic research that people talk about. I'm here to say that I don't see this dip in my own research. You would ask me about the stress and the happiness, and I think I should probably explain too some of the things that make people feel happy at this period. And what I'm finding is that people finally know who they are and accept who they are. They're not caring so much about what other people think of them. And I think that's really freeing and empowering. And so you feel good about yourself. So people have a lot more self-confidence. They feel as though, and there's more stability, which we can sometimes think of as being a little boring and dry. But goodness, I think when you look back to your late teens and early 20s, all of that change and I think sometimes it's really stressful to be going through that, still trying to figure out who you are. And finally, here you are, you know who you are, you don't care so much what other people think of you, and you have a little bit of money and a little bit more stability. And I think that's what makes people happy. So I'm not seeing this curve in my research, but it is worth saying that there was a study that was conducted looking at 22 economically developed countries and looking at well-being during the transition to parenthood. And they found that, sure enough, if you look at all of these countries together, you see a dip in well-being when people transition to parenthood. But if you go back again and look at this data more closely, what you actually see is you only get that dip in well-being in countries where there aren't social supports and social welfare systems in place to help people make that transition, right? So, and the US, in fact, out of these 22 developed countries, has the largest dip in well-being because in the US, there aren't things like mandated parental leave. There's not universal daycare. There's not a universal credit that everybody gets. Like I grew up in the UK and I remember going to the post office with my mum to pick up the child benefit. So you got money every week just for having a child at home. And, so you don't have that in the US. And so there's a huge dip here. But when you look at countries where they do have some of these social support systems in place, you actually see an increase in well-being when people have children. So I think it's interesting, right?
Yeah. Well, you could totally, I mean, if I think back, okay, so, when I had both of my kids, I was self-employed, so I could sort of set my own hours. I mean, people always say that, but really your customers set your hours. But, for the most part, I could take some time off. I could, lean on my team to take over certain things so that I didn't have to do it. We had great medical at the time. We had, all of these things that, we did have the house. We did have, everything that we felt comfortable with. And I can't imagine, going through that without all of those things set, it would have been way more stressful. So I can see why that data makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So why are we talking about happiness? It's like when I think about happiness, okay, it's great. And we know that we can still be happy and we can be stressed. We know all of these different things, but happiness can improve not just your mood, but it can also improve your physical health, your immune system, your cardiovascular health, blood pressure, things like that. Can we talk just a little about the importance of happiness?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right that we know that it is linked to all of these health outcomes. And I think just when you're happy, you're more energized too, right? You're able to take on some of these tasks. So perhaps if overall you're feeling happy and feeling good about things, you're able to be a better parent, a better child to your parent, a better employee. So I think it feeds into everything in our lives, and especially. And I think it really can especially serve as a buffer for stress as well. So I think it's really important for all of these reasons.
I think happiness and laughter. That's a key for sure for success. Okay, so we've talked about happiness here. We've got an understanding on this. What I have always wondered is, am I an adult? And we're going to deal with that when we come back. We'll take a short break. All right. And welcome back to Learning More. I'm Russ. And oh man, we're talking about happiness today. So how can you not be happy listening to this episode? I'm joined today by Clare, Mehta. And not only are we going to talk about happiness, but we're going to talk about adulthood. Okay, you could say at 18 you're allowed to vote. At 21 here in the States, you can have a drink, and I guess that's when you're an adult. But do we really feel like adults? Let's talk about that.
Well, Russ, first of all, I want to ask you whether you feel like an adult.
I would say, first of all, I feel my age when I play basketball with my son and I'm out of breath way before he is. And I can't quite make the shots after about 10, 15 minutes because I'm so tired. But generally, I don't know. The thing is, I think about the things that I do. I sit in a room and I talk to myself every day for the podcast and make myself laugh. I play video games. I go out and play, basketball or do things that I don't know if I can picture, let's say somebody, I don't know, like Walter Cronkite or somebody, like somebody that I totally thought was an adult as a kid. I don't know if they would do. So I don't know. Like I said, I've got the mortgage. I keep bringing that up because that's on my mind. I've got kids. I've got a career. I've got, these things that I do on the side. I've got all these different things, but I don't know if I am truly like what I thought would be an adult. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. So, this is one of the questions I ask all my research participants. Do you feel like an adult? And I was really surprised by the number of people who actually don't quite feel like an adult. So, I'm one of these people now who walks around asking everyone this question. Prior to the pandemic, I was asking people at bars and like any friends who I was meeting, and my husband introducing me to anyone I hadn't met before from work would be like, ask your question. And it was always such a conversation starter. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, because people really look at it in such a nuanced way. So one of my favorite moments was actually asking my husband if he felt like an adult, and he and I were married, had a mortgage. He had 2 cars, which I feel like, to me, like 2 cars, that's just excessive. That's like really grown up, right? And, and he had started his own business too, that he was doing pretty well at. And when I asked him if he felt like an adult, and by the way, I was asking him this in the context of me telling him I felt like an adult and I'm younger than him. And he said no. And I just couldn't understand it. So I listed all of these trappings of adulthood that he had back to him. And he said, well, we went and played pinball for 8 hours yesterday, and adults don't play pinball for 8 hours. And it's like, well, we do. So,
Right.
I think we look at these little things in our lives that we think either signify that we're grown up or we're not grown up, and so I think this is what really stops us. I like that you used Walter Cronkite as an example, that we have this idea in our head of this is what an adult looks like and this is what a grown up looks like, and I don't look like that, and my life doesn't look like that, so I can't be a grown up. So I think that stops us from fully feeling like an adult, and also I think that we worry about it being really boring to be a grown-up and to be an adult, right? We want to distance ourselves from that.
Yeah.
Our whole culture values youth, right? We don't really value being an adult. So I think we try and resist that as much as possible. So I think it's actually great that we're talking about these things, because if we can let people know, actually, it's pretty good to be an adult. You can, feel like stable and happy and have all of these, like your life, the things you just described are fantastic. You've got all of these exciting things going on. Your life hasn't stopped just because you've, reached a certain age.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about happiness, and you said emerging adulthood was 18 to 29. And I wrote that down because, okay, well, if emerging, what is a difference, let's say, between emerging adulthood and established adulthood?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because there's so many differences. So emerging adulthood, there's a whole list of things that kind of distinguish it from other periods of the lifespan. And one of them is that it's the age of exploration. So you're still trying to figure out exactly who you are. So you might date a whole bunch of people to figure out who you are in a romantic relationship and what kind of relationship you're looking for. You might end up trying on a bunch of different jobs and different career paths. And I teach at a college, so I see students constantly changing their majors. Like, one week they're going to be a doctor, the next week they're a lawyer, then they're a forensic psychologist. So there's a lot of this exploration going on, and also a lot of instability. So the number of residential changes in between 18 and 29 is something like 10, which is an awful lot, right? But you think back to that time and you're like,
I moved around a bunch.
Exactly. Different roommates. So you're really kind of figuring out who you are. And this is a really good, exciting period of the lifespan, and you should be doing this. And so, I always tell my students, you go out and make bad decisions, because now is the time to do it. The consequences are a little less severe, but as you get older, they become a little bit more severe. So one of the people I interviewed, I think this kind of sums up the difference between emerging and established adulthood pretty well. He was talking about how he used to like to just get in his car and just drive and just go to random places. And now he has a wife and a child. He's like, I can't do that. I can't just like take off for a few days. I have responsibilities. So I think that is really kind of, in a nutshell, one of the biggest differences, is that there are these responsibilities that people have in established adulthood that kind of do limit their freedoms in some ways, whereas in emerging adulthood, you're kind of free to try everything. But that's also not it's not always awesome to be chopping and changing so much, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's exactly, you just read my mind. That's what was going through my head when you were listing those things. It's like, oh, well, I could argue that my 20s were actually pretty darn fun, but when I think back, yeah, there was a lot of, I guess, instability, we'll say, because yeah, you're moving a lot, you're changing careers, you're changing jobs, you're changing, who you're dating, all of these different things. It's all kind of up in the air. And I wonder if that contributes, jumping back to the happiness topic, I wonder if that contributes. And that's
yeah,
one of the reasons why, once you've kind of established adulthood, that you start to feel better because you're
yeah.
kind of more on this solid ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Russ, I always think that was like my 20s were like such amazing years, and my late teens as well. I had such a great time. But now when I
Hmm.
think about that, it's exhausting. That was like really, really tiring. And like right now, I don't think I can live that lifestyle anymore. And
Hmm.
I'm pretty happy with the lifestyle that I have. I still get to do a whole bunch of fun things, but I have that stability. So, if I do get to go out and explore things, so you talked about having these projects on the side, you're able to do that because you have the stability that allows you to be able to go
Right.
out and explore.
Why do we need to know when we're an adult? Why do we need to know that?
I think that is a really good question that I probably don't have a good answer to. Like, in psychology, we like to know because we like to be able to put everyone into boxes and to be able to say, this is this period and this is what's happening here. And this is this period and this is what's happening here. And so one of the reasons why I conceptualized this age period of established adulthood was because I thought that I think it's useful for us to have a sense of what is unique about this period and what's going on in this period so that we can better support people as they navigate it. So I already talked a little bit about some of the social policy implications. And so I
Hmm.
think kind of knowing what is going on during this period helps us do that and helps us intervene if we need to in terms of people's mental health and just general supports that people might need. But in terms of actually knowing what age is it that you actually feel like an adult, I don't really think it matters. And the fact that I'm asking people, I've even asked people in their 50s and 60s who don't feel like adults yet, they're still living functional lives and doing just fine without knowing whether or not they're an adult. And so I think as long as we're able to function, that's what's really important. We don't necessarily need a label of being an adult.
With my kids the other day, I watched the movie Cocoon from the 80s. Remember that movie where
Mhm.
like it's about these, basically people in like a retirement. They basically get kind of like a fountain of youth and they're living it up. They're kicking cans and doing all kinds of stuff that they used to do when they were kids. What's interesting about some of these movies and things like that is I do feel like they give us this sort of perception or these, like, I guess, cultural norms or societal norms of like, oh, this is what an adult is like. And I guess that's, part of it too. It's like,
Yeah.
I almost don't want to be that. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't even
No
know if
one
I want to
does.
admit that I'm an adult, right? Like,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, nobody does. A lot of the people I interviewed, when I asked them, "Do you feel like an adult?" People were saying, "I don't want to say that I do because that's boring." Like when I think of, it's funny you keep talking about your mortgage, but it's like when I think of being an adult, it's like paying mortgages, like replacing the
Hmm.
roof, painting the fence, like all of the worst, most tedious
Right.
things about life is what we conjure up when we think about being an adult. But maybe we should be thinking about some of these other things like being able to travel more and being able
Hmm.
to do some of the things that you just couldn't afford to do when you were younger.
Right. Yeah. I feel like it's a mindset thing. And that's, like changing our mindset on what an adult means
Yeah, yeah,
is probably a good thing
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
people.
I had a moment once when I was in graduate school, so I was probably in my late 20s at the time, but at that point I was like, I'm here, I'm on my own, I'm from England originally and was here in the US, and doing my graduate work, and was like, tonight for dinner I am going to have beer and French fries because I am an adult now, and that means I get to choose exactly what I eat, and my mum can't tell me that this is not a suitable dinner. So I went and
Right.
got the French fries and the beer, and I had a stomach ache about 20 minutes after. You were right. So I think that's one of the nice things about being an adult is you get to make these choices even if they're terrible.
Right. That's good. Actually, that does sound delicious, though. I'll have to give that a try to see if
Yeah.
I get the stomach ache. Maybe I'll take some Tums beforehand.
Yes. And this
Just in
is what
case.
adulthood gives us too. We know that you
Yeah.
have Pepto-Bismol and then you eat whatever you want.
That's awesome. Okay, so I would, your research is available on your website as well, right?
Yes. So my website is, I would like to say it's very exciting, but I am an academic. So, it's full of research and information about the I'm doing, which if you're into that kind of thing, I guess it is very exciting. So yeah, we have some information over on my website, and it will be updated soon as well to have even more information. So you can go and learn a little bit about established adulthood. There's a whole tab that's kind of dedicated to that. And it also has information in case you are in this age period, 30 to 45, and are interested in participating in our research study. We've been interviewing people across the country about whether or not they feel like an adult and what that experience of adulthood is like.
Awesome. So you can even learn more about this topic over on your website. And I do got to tell you one funny thing. When I landed on your website and on the sidebar, you've got an ad. It was for a refinance. So it totally goes with our topics today.
Back to the mortgage again.
Exactly. All right, Claire, thank you so much for joining me today and helping us to learn more about aging, happiness, adulting. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me anytime.
It was such a great show today. I had so much fun. And we've got so many great shows coming up. You've got some great topics. We're going to talk about reincarnation with an author of a book about reincarnation. Is it real? Is it a hoax? What's going on there? We're going to learn more about that. We're also going to talk about narcissism. Everybody thinks that everyone else is a narcissist. Some people even think that they are. Well, we're going to find out more and learn more about that in the coming weeks. Also, we're going to be talking about the modern Olympic ruins. Yeah, so many cities wanted to be a host city for the games. Do they still want to do that? Not so much. We'll be learning more about that in the coming weeks as well. All right, so please do subscribe. We'd love to have you listening every week, and share our podcasts wherever you can. We do appreciate that as well. And of course, rating us always helps, and the 5-star helps the most. So whatever you can do, we do appreciate it. We thank you for listening to Learning More.